Otwituaries. Tiny poetic elegies for the celebrated, the infamous and the obscure. Written and presented by Andy Jackson.
Welcome to the monthly Otwituaries podcast. I've been writing these short tweet-length poems called Otwituaries to celebrate the passing of celebrities both great and obscure since 2012. They try to capture something of that person in up to 280 characters. The only qualification is that the person has to be someone whose contribution to the world has had an influence on me, however minor. There are now over 800 of them. They aren't necessarily great poems, but they do come from the heart. The Otwituaries are published as a kind of instant response. They appear initially on X, what used to be called Twitter, hence the name of this project, on Facebook, and on Instagram, and then are gathered on the Otwituaries blog at otwituaries.blogspot.com. Please do follow them if you enjoy the ones you hear in this podcast. This is the podcast for the month of September 2023. This month we feature another selection of poetic tributes to those who passed away in that month. An impressionist from 1970s television, an unlikely folk singer and musician, a heartthrob Scottish actor and cult TV hero, and a feisty campaigner for nuclear disarmament. I find a lot of my Otwituaries focus on celebrities of the 1960s, 70s and 80s. Unsurprising, given that those were my formative years, and this period was full of people who made an impression on me. And making an impression was a stock-in-trade of Mike Yarwood, who was king of the TV impersonators throughout his 1970s heyday. Yarwood was born near Stockport in South Manchester in 1941, and after winning a local talent contest, he slogged it out across the northern club circuit, like so many of his generation. After a few lucky breaks, he gained some TV exposure and ended up with his own BBC show in the early 1970s. Many will remember his Harold Wilsons, his Frank Spencers, Patrick Moores, and Eddie Warings. I once did an impression of Yarwood's impression of the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Denis Healey, at a school talent contest, which I didn't win. Tracy Naylor won, by miming to an ABBA song, I recall. Miming. He usually ended his TV show with a song. Well, that was what light entertainers did in those days, though he couldn't really sing. He would do a few impressions mid-song and then would preface his big finish by saying, "And this is me," as if we couldn't tell. When I posted this Otwituary on Facebook on the day Mike died, I had a robust comment from someone I've never met who said he was talentless and a waste of time. While it's true that his skills as a mimic were nothing compared to Rory Bremner or Steve Coogan, who came after, he has to be viewed in the context of his own time. And in that time, he was hugely popular and successful and well-loved. His 1977 Christmas show was the most watched TV show of that year. Whatever we think now, back then, he was the king of the Impressionists. Unlike me and my childhood Denis Healey, when we did impressions, they were just impressions of his impressions. When people copy your version of other people, that's how you leave an impression. Mike Yarwood died September the 8th, 2023. You were the 70s, reduced to costume, prop, and twitch of eye, a weekly cast of unpersons we can barely recall, impressions clinging to the ledge of light entertainment, proof that imitation was the sincerest form of Saturday. Popular music back in the 1960s and early 70s was a broad church. Pop groups rubbed shoulders with soul legends, crooners and cabaret singers, novelty songs, brass bands, psychedelia, and folk music. Folk singer and musician Roger Whittaker was one of those names whom you probably assumed was already long dead. I certainly hadn't heard much from him in at least 40 years. Along with his straight and wholesome music, inoffensive protest songs, highly orchestrated sea shanties and vanilla-flavoured folk ballads, he sported an equally square image. Beardy and hairsprayed, bespectacled and avuncular, pressed slacks, a safari jacket and sensible shoes. He seemed to have been perpetually middle-aged and unfashionable, but he did have an audience. Probably the same audience as The Spinners, The Seekers, and Ralph McTell. Your parents probably liked him. He was undoubtedly talented. He was a prodigious whistler and was hugely popular in Germany, where his style fitted with the German Schlager tradition. He stood for a kind of cosy and unthreatening entertainment that is long past. Guest spots on weekend light entertainment TV shows, Christmas specials, and the occasional Top of the Pops appearance for his minor hits. Durham Town, a wistful song of separation, as was his biggest hit, The Last Farewell, and his surprise US hit, New World in the Morning. Watching some of these performances back on YouTube, I found my wife got quite upset. Her late father had liked him a lot, and his music was often played in her childhood home. Perhaps that was Roger Whittaker's gift to us in the here and now, not necessarily as an artist in his own right with a lasting body of work and a place in the nation's heart, but as a symbol of the era he represented, an era to which we can never return. Roger Whittaker died September the 13th, 2023. There is a backwater of music for bearded folk dreamers, troubadours in hush puppies, cheerful whistlers in the prows of boats that are always leaving but never reach their destination. Could there be anyone more glamorous in the 1960s than Scottish actor David McCallum? He broke hearts across the US and the UK with his portrayal of the mysterious and impossibly handsome Russian secret agent Ilya Kuryakin on the TV show The Man from U.N.C.L.E. This intensely popular show was set in a sub-James Bond world of espionage and intrigue, and pitted Kuryakin and his American ally Napoleon Solo, played by the imposing Robert Vaughn, against the agents of Thrush across 100 or so episodes in the mid-1960s. McCallum had earlier been cast as the dashing Ashley Pitt in the movie The Great Escape, and I also saw him as Judas Iscariot in the biblical epic The Greatest Story Ever Told. In the 70s, I grew up with the great BBC war dramas of Gerard Glaister, particularly Colditz, where he reprised the Ashley Pitt character. I remember my dad asking me in 1975 whether I would rather watch ITV's Space 1999 or BBC's American import of The Invisible Man. They were on at the same time on Friday nights. No video recorders in those days. I chose the latter, mainly because David McCallum was in it. He was great also as Alan Breck Stewart in a version of Robert Louis Stevenson's Kidnapped. Later, I remember being completely baffled by ITV's Sapphire and Steel, the strangest cult show of all. And if it weren't for co-stars Joanna Lumley and David McCallum, I would have given up on it quickly. I never saw his late career turn as Dr. Ducky Mallard in the NCIS series, but I understand he was very popular in the role. McCallum was rarely in anything less than interesting. He was the most glamorous of leads, boyish and blonde, a man of action, and I can't think of anyone on TV whom I would rather have been. David McCallum died September 25th, 2023. Open Channel D. A yearning message beams in from a million sighing teens to their agent of cool. Escape is not an option. The mission calls. Medium atomic weights are available. He has been reassigned. It's hard to believe now, but in my teenage and student days, we lived constantly in the shadow of nuclear war, which seemed unavoidable back then. There were regular high-profile demonstrations against the proliferation of nuclear weapons across the superpowers of the USA and the USSR, and also against the UK's role as a nuclear power. At the head of these protests were the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, CND. I knew some of the names, the late Bruce Kent, but I was also aware of the formidable Pat Arrowsmith, who tirelessly fought for nuclear disarmament but also pursued a variety of other pacifist causes, and also fought for feminist and lesbian identity. She was in the original Committee of 100 in 1960, public signatories of the Anti-War and Civil Disobedience Charter, which included philosopher Bertrand Russell, playwright John Osborne, and poet Hugh MacDiarmid. Pat was regularly imprisoned for protest activities, but often resisted incarceration and was a serial absconder from open prisons. Parallels between her work and the suffragette movement are clear, and she brought an obstinacy and bloody-mindedness to her protests. Sometimes that's the only way to get heard. When I was a student in Manchester, I remember her coming to the university to speak. I regret now not going to hear. I was politically immature back then, and anyway, I would have made a useless activist. I probably still would. But in looking at her life, I was struck by the difference between politics and activism. Pat Arrowsmith was from that rare breed of highly motivated, issues-driven individuals, active but not fanatical, determined but not divisive. We maybe need more people like Pat to counter the bland career politicians and self-interested non-entities that we continue to elect. If politics is the art of the possible, activism is the art of the inevitable. Pat Arrowsmith died September the 27th, 2023. Can we march together? You lead, and we will follow. We number 100 and more, marching to a place with no bombs, no cells, the struggle won, where the only thing mutually assured is love. Also in September, we said goodbye to bodybuilding pioneer Lisa Lyon, geneticist and cloning expert, remember Dolly the sheep, Ian Wilmot, actor Jean Boat, Belgian musician and the voice of Plastic Bertrand Lou Depric, and actor Michael Gambon. Check out their Otwituaries at otwituaries.blogspot.com. You can follow the Otwituaries via my Facebook page, Instagram feed, and by using the hashtag Otwituary on X. I'll be back next month with more stories and more poems. Until then, mind how you go.
You've been listening to Otwituaries, a monthly selection of tiny poetic elegies for the celebrated, the infamous, and the obscure. Written and presented by Andy Jackson. The music is by Mark Vivian.